order if members can take their seats. Third order of business, message from the Senate. Clerk will read.
Madam Speaker, the President has signed Second Substitute House Bill 1032. Colleen Russ, Deputy Secretary.
Message received. Sixth order of business, second reading of bills. We'll take the following bills in the following order. Senate Bill 5280, Senate Bill 5069, engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5440, and engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5583. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Senate Bill 5280, clerk will read.
An act relating to the duty of clergy to report. Timing.
The Human Service, Youth, and Early Learning Committee amendment is before us for the purpose of amendment. Amendment 683, clerk will read.
On page 1, after line 2 of the strike, internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 19th to move adoption of the amendment.
Good evening, Madam Speaker. Please move Amendment 683.
It's been moved and seconded we adopt Amendment 683. Remarks. The good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This underlying bill came over from the Senate came across the rotunda from the other body in a shape that we liked it. It has been worked with a little bit on this side of the rotunda in a direction we don't like so much. So what this amendment is trying to do is basically narrow the focus of the underlying bill and say that the various elements of the underlying policy shall be construed and enforced and interpreted narrowly so that the confessor-penitent relationship is analogous, as much as it can be, to an attorney-client type of relationship. It narrows the frame, the context of the underlying policy in a way that I think is constructive and I would hope would be supportive of the ultimate goals of the underlying policy. So it's narrowing. I hope it's clarifying. Asking for a yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 30th, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm respectfully asking for a no vote. We do not tell the courts how to interpret the language of a bill. The courts have a whole process by which they interpret laws. They look at not only statutes, other court cases, and other ways to do their analysis. And it would be inappropriate for the legislature to adopt this amendment because it would essentially change the whole doctrine of legal interpretation.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 31st, Representative Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The courts indeed do look at legislative intent, and this amendment is certainly about legislative intent, and passing this amendment will make clear to all of the folks out there, Madam Speaker, what the intent of the legislature and what the meaning of these words are. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Additional remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 683. We'll have an oral vote. All in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Amendment is not adopted. Amendment 683, or Amendment 579, clerk will read.
On page 2, line 38 of the striking, them to make a report.
The good member from the 13th to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 579.
It's been moved and seconded. We adopt Amendment 579. Remarks. The good member from the 13th, Representative Dent.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. May I read from the effect statement of the amendment?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment makes the following changes to the underlying bill. 1, it allows members of the clergy to not report child abuse or neglect if the information is obtained in the clergy member's professional character as a religious or spiritual advisor when the information is obtained solely as a result of a confession made under clergy penitent privilege. and the clergy member is authorized to hear the confession and has a duty under the doctrine or custom of the clergy's member's church to keep the confession secret. Requires that a member of the clergy report child abuse or neglect if the clergy member has received the information from any source other than the confession. Removes elder from the definition of a member of the clergy. Requires that the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee provide recommendations on modifying the list of individuals identified as mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect, and whether those individuals should be required to report child abuse and neglect information obtained solely as a result of a privileged communication. Madam Speaker, we should be concerned with child abuse, all kinds of child abuse. That should be on the top of our list. It absolutely has to be. But we can't legislate, we can't force everyone out there to report something. And you know, we have, many of our religious organizations have provisions for confession to help people live a better life, to do better. And you know, while I have never belonged to a religion that does that, my wife has, and she's talked to me about it a lot. And I understand what this is about and how important it is for these people to go to confession and feel safe there. Just like we want our children to feel safe somewhere. All of us have a little bit of child in us, and we want to be safe. And if confession is part of your religion, if it's part of what you practice in your life to live a better life, then going to confession should be a safe place. But if you go to confession and you confess something that obviously fits into what this bill is about, child abuse, and you expect the clergy to report you, well, number one, he or she doesn't know who you are. So that puts them in a tough spot as well. So, and then the next, I'll make it real quick, the elder part. Most elders are the leaders of the church who are elected to lead the business part of the church, and that puts them in a bad spot too. This is a good amendment, makes this a much better bill, and can get many of us to yes. Please vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks. A good member from the 41st, Representative Sen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my good gentleman, a good friend from the 13th for the discussion and bringing this amendment forward. We're going to ask respectfully for a no vote in addition to some of the other aspects around confession, which I'm sure we'll discuss in other amendments. The word elder is actually a pretty critical addition to the definition of clergy. This bill was originally motivated by a Jehovah's Witness issue around sexual abuse of children, and in that religion, elder is one of the descriptions of their clergy. And so it was requested from numerous testifiers that we add the word elder to make sure that we are truly capturing all of the clergy when we pass this legislation. So I'm going to respectfully ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 25th, Representative Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am urging adoption of this amendment. It really is trying to strike that balance between what we're trying to achieve here tonight, and that's protecting children from sexual abuse, and also protecting the age-old institution of penitential confession. I don't know everybody's background here on the floor, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and I know who the elders are. And it was my concern that anything that this body vote out would include elders and their responsibility to be included as mandated reporters. There are other definitions in the underlying bill with regards to duties and how somebody has a position of authority in the way in which they make decisions on behalf of a congregation, and that through definition include the Jehovah's Witness elders and their responsibility to report mandated abuse. At the same time, this protects a penitential confession, which is I'm not a Catholic and I'm not a spokesperson for the Catholic religion, but I recognize that this is a sacred part of the institution and exercising that faith. And this amendment here keeps that institution intact and protects penitential confession, yet makes clergy responsible outside of the penitential confession box to report abuse when they become aware of it outside of that penitential confession. And for many of us in our faith lives, we are close to clergy, and clergy have the opportunity to interact with us and are made aware and alerted to instances of abuse and child sexual abuse in particular outside of that penitential confession box. So this is a good amendment. It still accomplishes both. You don't have to include penitential confession and therefore you're not able to protect children from sexual abuse. We can do both here, and it's done through this amendment, and it includes the Jehovah's Witness elders. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 28th, Representative Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please excuse Representative Santos.
Members excused. Additional remarks. Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 579. We will do an oral vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. No. Amendment is not adopted. Amendment 556. Clerk will read.
On page 6, line 3 of the striking amendment, them to make a report.
The good member from the 39th to move adoption of the amendment.
Yes, please move Amendment 556.
It's been moved and seconded we adopt Amendment 556. Remarks. The good member from the 39th, Representative Eslick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a pretty simple amendment, and it restores the clergy privilege protection. So essentially, it changes it back to the Senate, to the other House's version of the bill. I was raised in that religion that we're referring to. 7 siblings, church every Sunday, confession at least once a month. I have 5 siblings left in my life, and when this bill came to my committee, and we had some wonderful discussion. We had testimony that was incredible. We had the bishop from Seattle, and he gave us the explanation of what the confessional, what the sacrament meant, and how important it was to have that place for people to come and be able to confess the most horrible sins, because that's the first step to resolving and restoring your life. I can't imagine that we are playing with such a sacrament that is hundreds of years old. This is a huge turning point for our state of Washington. I think we need to really, really look at this closer. So please say yes to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 30th, Representative Taylor.
Madam Speaker, when a child is coming to a clergy member, they may not understand the difference between when a confession is happening within the penitent privilege. When an adult is coming to a clergy, they may not understand all of the dynamics of the privilege. What's really important is that that person can confess and engage with the clergy and know that they will be safe. Know that they will get help. Know that there won't be retaliation against them, that that person, that clergy, is going to help them. By making that person who is the clergy, regardless of religion, because not all practices are the same, be required to protect that child, prevent abuse, prevent the harm. We must have a bright line rule that says who you are as the clergy. You shall report the abuse. We're not touching the part where you would be required to go to court. This is simply a way to get action started to protect this child. Madam Speaker, I'm asking you to vote no on this amendment. Protect these children.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good amendment. Vote yes. We have bright line rules. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution is a bright line rule, and it protects the freedom of religion to be practiced on its terms, not the government's terms. We have another bright line rule, Madam Speaker. Article 1, Section 11 of our state's Constitution, which says that freedom of religion means that religion can be practiced on its terms, not on the government's terms. We have bright line rules, Madam Speaker, and the problem with the policy as it is that this amendment remedies is that the policy runs afoul of our bright line constitutional rules. This amendment fixes that problem. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Additional remarks. Seeing none, the good member from the 13th, Representative Ybarra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I was born Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I was taught Catholic. I was taught what the rules were when you go to confession. As a kid, my mom told me how to do it. My dad told me, grandfather, you said when you go talk to your priest, you tell them what you did and all the sins that you have. And the priest would give us advice about what to do. If we did something wrong, if we did something terrible, we were supposed to report. That was the penance. It wasn't 3 amens, 5 Hail Marys, do the rosary 10 times. It was, you shall go out and you shall confess to whoever you need to confess to. If it's the person you stole money from, the person you beat up, the person that you stole from, you were supposed to confess. And we were taught that from a very, very young age. From the time we first started going to Catholic Church, when I was baptized, that's when it started. All those lessons that we learned, every Catholic out there talks about this, and why is it so important when you go to confession, why it's so important that we do that, because it saves our soul. And what this bill does is looking at one particular religion. If this particular bill or another bill that comes in was about getting rid of some of the sacraments in, let's say, the Jewish community, the Jewish or the Hindus, but right now you guys are attacking Catholics. I don't know why you were doing this in this particular place, but this bill, and if this amendment doesn't go through, you will be attacking a religion that's been here. There's 1.3 billion Catholics that have to follow this rule. And if this amendment isn't passed, this is what this House is going to be doing. It's going to be working working against my religion, where I grew up, where I love my God. Whoever your God is, great, wonderful, but you're attacking my religion.
Please state your point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Hoping the reminder can be offered to the member not to impugn the motives of members on the floor.
Your point is well taken. Please do not impugn the motives of others. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize, wasn't sure what I did, but...
Please proceed.
Great.
You have 53 seconds.
Thank you. And again, this particular amendment is going to keep the Catholic religion the way it is. Is that like... So I think if we pass this particular amendment, then it will be a good position to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 8th District, Representative Bernard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I personally feel that all abuse of children should be reported. Simply, plainly, there is no reason or there is no clear reason that clergy should be exempt. if children are being abused, it should be reported. And I would urge a no vote on this amendment, even though I dearly love the person that what did you do? She put this amendment on the bar. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 16th, Representative Clicker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I converted to the Catholic Church in 1996. And the one thing that drew me to the Catholic Church was confession. Because it's a washing, it's a cleansing. It's something that I can leave with and go out and heal. And go out and find reconciliation. And show my apologies and talk to others. When a priest listens to your confession, the priest doesn't just tell you to go out and say a few Hail Marys or Our Fathers. The priest works you through your confession. Then there's reconciliation after that. There's an act of contrition. And part of the act of contrition is the priest will have you go out and take care of those problems. If it has to do with abuse, if it has to do with stealing, murder, whatever it may be, a grave sin, not a venial sin. It is so important that you are able to confide in the priest. But it takes a lot for a person to get up and go to confession, especially when they have a grave sin. That's what confession's for. If they're able to take and have enough strength to go do that, the priest then helps them where they can eventually do it. Once that person understands that a law like this passes, a bill like this passes, they'll refrain from going and confessing. We lose that opportunity. This amendment would take care of that problem. We would probably be able to see continuous confessions and find more of the abusers or whatever it may be. It's important that we vote yes on this amendment.
Additional remarks. The good member from the 16th, Representative Rue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm also asking for a no on the amendment. I want to provide a little bit of diversity of thought on my side and back up my member from the 8th. We heard some comments about the constitutionality, and of course, all of us respect religious liberty and value the importance of that. That's a founding principle of the United States. That doesn't mean that one person is entitled under the protection of the First Amendment to violate another person or for a member of the clergy to shield an offender from justice. The length of time of some of these traditions are thousands of years, but there are a lot of other traditions that have existed for a long time and are unjust and have been overturned. It's not a valid argument, in my opinion. The conscience of an offender is not more important than intercepting abuse that's happening to a child. So I'm asking for a no.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 6th District, Representative Graham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess I'm a little more optimistic than some that I've heard. The reason for that, Madam Speaker, is what's coming to my mind is so much of what has come up in my district. I was fortunate today to actually have my pastor give the blessing today. And one of the things that's constantly kind of come up, it's taken me a while to get him here, but he was here. And part of what ended up coming out of that, Madam Speaker, is separation of church and state. That is a conversation that we've been having. And I think that it's finally, this is a good wake-up call, Madam Speaker, I believe, for our churches. Because Our churches need to start understanding, Madam Speaker, that it is that the churches may participate in our state, but the state needs to stay out of our churches. There are people that I know that have been harmed, children that were abused by Catholic priests. I do have a personal friend, Jehovah's Witness, who went through that. Madam Speaker, I feel their pain. And I do believe that this is a great opportunity to push the issue as far as we must have adults, people of all ages, standing up for our children, whether they go to church or not. That shouldn't be the issue. And honestly, Madam Speaker, as far as this amendment is concerned, the issue is stepping into a confessional which is sacred. It's private. And I do believe, Madam Speaker, that if this amendment does not pass, this may not have the effect that some seek. This may be waking the sleeping giant that has been asleep, I think, for far too long. This may be exactly what it takes to get them up, mobilized, and moving. And if that's what happens, Madam Speaker, so be it. It's long overdue. Please accept this amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 25th, Representative Jacobson. Oh, Chambers. The good member from the 25th, Representative
You don't have
Chambers.
to say it like that.
In the right
thank
district.
you, Madam Speaker. I rise to urge adoption of this amendment, and it's really kind of a skinny down version of the previous amendment, in which it still protects the sacred sacrament of penitential confession. And I think it's important to put this into context of what this means to not just Washingtonians, but the 1.3 billion Catholics around the world. As I said earlier, I'm not Catholic, but I've been to many Catholic churches as I've traveled the world, and I'm just always in awe of these beautiful churches and this institution that has protected the faith for 2,000 years, despite wars and uprisings and, countries created, destroyed, civilizations. The faith has been protected despite its flaws, and penitential confession is a fundamental piece to that faith. We're here tonight really because we want to also protect children from childhood sexual abuse. And it's not that we have to choose one or the other. We can protect penitential confession and protect children as well. The confessional process allows children to seek a safe place and to confess what is happening to them, and that's a sacred, safe place for them to seek help, in which they can be encouraged, give a direction, and encouraged to report their abuse to the authorities that can take care of the perpetrator. Conversely, any perpetrator that uses the confessional to confess those sins and that they are preying upon a child can also be directed to atone and make right and to seek justice and receive that encouragement that they need to report themselves and how they are harming someone else. So you can protect penitential confession and get action out of individuals that need to move forward and seek justice. Please adopt the amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 35th, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Joining my colleagues from the 16th and the 8th today, I have a great respect for everyone's religious views and their various, religious cultures. And this is a very tough bill, a very tough thing to talk about. Originally, there was a House version of this bill, and I voted no while it went through committee. And I considered a lot of different testimony.
If the good member can speak to the amendment before us, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I am urging a no vote on this amendment, unfortunately, and it pains me to do so a little bit, but I agree that we need to do more to protect our kids from child abuse and sexual abuse. And I don't know that I agree that the underlying bill is harming the clergy penitent privilege, which is already in RCW right now. Multiple other states have this similar laws and legislation without this amendment tonight. And the Supreme Court has ruled on those things, that it does uphold First Amendment rights. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I think that we should vote down this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 556. There will be an oral vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. Amendment is not adopted. Amendment 575, clerk will read.
On page 6, line 3 of the
Last
striking
line.
amendment, them to make a report.
The good member from the 19th to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please move Amendment 575.
It's been moved and seconded we adopt Amendment 575. Remarks. The good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a good amendment. Please vote yes. Clearly, emotions and personal reactions run high on this issue. But let us take a step back and let us reason together. Our state's case law has defined this term penitential confession that we've been using in this discussion. Some people call it ritual confession. And what this amendment does is it takes the definition of penitential confession that has been developed largely by case law in this state and applies it to the underlying policy. Now, it maintains, the amendment maintains that clergy will be mandatory reporters as the underlying policy makes them, but does exempt information and confidences that are shared as part of a penitential confession, and that it defines that penitential confession in 5 parts, again, derived from our state's case law. And what those 5 parts include is that the confession is made orally, spoken, not writing or by email or some other way. That it takes place confidentiality between one confessor and one penitent. That it is made in the spirit of reconciliation and admission and spiritual admission of wrongdoing. And that it is done in a context that any reasonable person would consider one of confidence, of privacy, not in a public arena, not in front of a group of people. These are the terms, these are the parts of the definition of a penitential confession that our own state courts have developed over time. And Madam Speaker, I think they work to the goals of the underlying bill and also to the constitutional protections of ritual confession. Madam Speaker, I think this amendment threads a needle that needs to be threaded. I think it makes important distinctions and it improves the bill. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 38th District, Representative Cortez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm respectfully asking for a no on this amendment. We appreciate the narrower definition, but we don't want to pick and choose religious beliefs. Madam Speaker, I'm Catholic. I was in church every Sunday. I did my classes before confirmation, very beautiful memories. It's a big part of not only my family, but my culture. But Madam Speaker, I'm sure you will agree that it is our duty as a legislature to do everything and anything to prevent and address child abuse in every way and everywhere. Madam Speaker, again, I respectfully request a no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 39th, Representative Eslick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in support of this amendment. Defining this in the bill helps us to understand the importance of what we need to keep intact that has been with us for hundreds of years. When a person does go into the confessional, they are encouraged to seek counseling or to turn themselves in, depending on what the issue is. So it's really important that we make sure that we get this in, and please vote yes on this amendment.
Thank you. With the consent of the House, House Rule 14C will be suspended to continue working past 10 p.m. Hearing no objections, so ordered. If members choose to take off their jackets, they may do so. Additional remarks. The good member from the 13th, Representative Dent.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 9 years, I've never taken my jacket off, so I'll tell a little story to put this confession thing maybe in a different context. So in the program, the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotic Anonymous, and these programs, 12 steps, those 12 steps are boiled down to 3, okay? 1 is trust God, 2 is you clean house, and 3 is you help others, okay? So the clean house part, when people have hit the bottom and they want to make a difference, part of that 12-step program is you clean house. You go look in the mirror. And the 5th step of Alcoholics Anonymous is you confide your sins and what you've done wrong in another human being. Okay? So just saying those sins is the first step. That doesn't mean they're all going to go away and everything's fine. You've made that first step, similar to going into a confessional. You've made that first step. But now you have to deal with it. And if you've done something that is wrong, it's never going to leave you alone until you make it right. It just isn't going to happen. And that's what we're talking. If we take away an individual's ability to go to confession and make that first step towards healing, if we take that away, they may not ever get there. If a person is abusing children and understands that if they say that in a confessional, then it's their fair game, why would they do that? They won't. And we're going to take away that first step of repentance. Madam Speaker, this is a good amendment. I'm asking for a yes vote.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 35th, Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please excuse Representative Waters.
Members excused. Additional remarks. Good member from the 25th, Representative Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am urging adoption of this important amendment, again, as it pertains to confession. Confession provides an opportunity, perhaps the only one, to make right and to own to the fact, particularly when it comes to child sexual abuse. You have to own up to it before you can do anything about it. It creates the opportunity for counsel, for admonishment. It creates the opportunity for restoration and justice. Without confession, the opportunity for restoration may be lost. May be lost for perpetrators and victims alike. That's why this is so important to protect this institution, and that we keep penitential confession and also be able to protect the victims who need us most. Please adopt the amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 575. All in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Amendment adopted. Amendment 574. Clerk will read.
On page 8, line 3 of the striking amendment, requirement under this subsection.
The good member from the 19th to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please move Amendment 574 to treat lawyers just like we treat ministers.
Amendment 574. The good member from the 49th, what purpose do you raise?
I rise for a point of order.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Requesting a ruling on the scope and object of this amendment.
Speaker's ruling on scope and objects, Senate Bill 5280, Amendment 574. The title of the substitute Senate Bill 5078 is an act related to 52. It should say 5280 is an act related to the duty of the clergy to report child abuse or neglect. The bill requires members of the clergy to report child abuse or neglect if there's a reasonable cause to believe that a child has suffered abuse or neglect. Amendment 574 extends this reporting requirement to attorneys. The Speaker therefore finds and rules that the amendment is outside the scope of the bill as defined by its title. The point of order is well taken. Amendment 558, clerk will read.
On page 1 of the striking amendment, correct the title.
The good member from the 13th to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 558.
Been moved and seconded we adopt Amendment 558. Remarks. The good member from the 13th, Representative Dent.
My apologies, Madam Speaker. I'd like to read the effect statement of the amendment, please.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Replaces the contents of the bill with a requirement that the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee provide recommendations on modifying the list of individuals identified as mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect, and wherever those individuals should be required to report child abuse and neglect, information obtained solely as a result of a privileged communication, and report its findings to the legislature by December 1st, 2023. We can't make everyone, Madam Speaker, a mandated reporter. And I think by looking at it and taking a look at this, taking an audit of those that we have and who could be effective mandated reporters, I think is important. But we can't assign all 98 members in this body to be mandated reporters. It doesn't work. And I think taking a look at the ones that could be effective, who cannot be effective, is what we need to do. And that's what makes this a good amendment, is we're going to take a pragmatic look at what we're trying to accomplish here. If it was up to me, we'd never see another case of child abuse in this world, ever. But somehow I didn't get put in that charge of that category, so it's going to continue to happen. But we need to be reasonable about what we expect from people, because if we put it on everybody, pretty soon nobody does it. And that's what concerns me. It's what concerns me about this, what we've been talking about here in the last 30 minutes or so. we'll put ourselves in a corner where it doesn't happen. So this is a good amendment. I'm asking for a yes vote.
Additional remarks. The good member from the 41st, Representative Sen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In preparation for this amendment, I did a quick audit of some headlines. May I read?
Please proceed.
So in my audit, I found just 3 headlines real quickly, top things that came up. Jehovah's Witnesses covered up child sexual abuse in Washington state for decades, lawsuit alleges, from October 2nd, 2022. Baltimore's Catholic Church sexually abused at least 600 children over 60 years, says Maryland AG, April 6, 2023. Researchers reveal patterns of sexual abuse in religious settings, August 5th, 2020. Madam Speaker, I'm asking for a no on this amendment. We don't need to do another audit. We know that there's child abuse. Unfortunately, we know there's child abuse in religious organizations as well. And we do not need another audit. We need to take action. Please vote no.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 25th, Representative Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am urging adoption of this amendment. You know, we hear a lot, many bills in this institution about JLARC studies, and it's not to be taken lightly or be flippant about it because it is such a serious matter. Before these headlines of the Jehovah's Witness organization and how they have protected pedophiles, this really comes out of something that happened in Australia. It's called the Australian Royal Commission, and what we might think of here as a task force. It was a 5-year-long commission in which the country of Australia decided that they were going to look at childhood sexual abuse and look at all religious institutions and how those institutions, how children could be better served. It was astonishing in December of 2017. When those results came out. Truly shocking. Can I read some of these numbers?
Please proceed.
The Australian Royal Commission had 42,000 calls from victims, 25,000 letters, resulted in 2,575 referrals to authorities. We're talking about this because this small little religion, and it's hard to even call it that, of 8 million people across the world, pales in comparison to big institutions like the Catholic religion of 1.3 billion members. This small little organization in Australia, a lot less population, had so many instances of childhood sexual abuse. And it was a result of that commission that exposed this. Based on those numbers in the population of Australia, the number of Jehovah's Witnesses there, and then a number of instances of abuse, it's estimated that the congregations and the elders and the ministerial servants and the people that come and knock on your door and they stand at a park with a cart asking you if you want a free Bible study are protecting upwards of 50,000 pedophiles in this country. I would be shocked to see what we would find out if we conducted a JLARC study and looked in Washington at what's happening with this organization in our state and childhood sexual abuse. Please adopt the amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 39th, Representative Eslick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recommend this amendment. This amendment would put this whole thing off till the end of December. Give us some chance to go home, talk to our constituents, find out what they really want, and come back another day. Please say yes on this amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also asking for a yes on the amendment from a different perspective. Madam Speaker, I believe that without some form of revision, some form of amendment, some form of getting this underlying bill back to the form that it came to us from the other chamber, that this policy has constitutional defects in it, and that if it is challenged in court, it may be found to be unconstitutional and overturned altogether. What this amendment does by holding off for a period of time and allowing our established committee to review this subject matter and try to come up with some data-informed conclusions about what may work and what may not, we may be able to craft a better version of this underlying bill that does not have constitutional defects in it. Madam Speaker, too often in the last several years, we in this chamber have put forward public policy into law that has been so flawed that it needs revision.
Please do not impugn members. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The policies are the problems, and they've needed repair and cure and fixes almost immediately, at least in legislative terms. Madam Speaker, there's a likelihood that this underlying policy is going to turn out to be one of those that's going to need remedy and repair as soon as next session. By adopting this amendment, we avoid that scenario, we avoid that risk, and we may take the time to put together a version of this policy that could go forward in a more certain way. We talk a lot here about evidence-based policy, data-informed policy. Let's allow our established mechanism for determining these things, give us better evidence, give us better data, and give the people of the state a better public policy. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 8th District, Representative Bernard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I'm asking for a no vote on this amendment. Not that this audit would be a bad thing. I think it'd be a great thing as a separate bill, but to replace the content of the bill in no way protects children. I mean, I'm somewhat shocked, that we are not doing more to hold clergy more accountable for what some we just need to protect our children, and excuse me, it's just late at night. So clergy should not be exempt from reporting this. I do not understand why we would want to take the exemption, or why would we would want to clergy has to report abuse. Otherwise, we are failing our children. And this amendment replaces a really good bill with a study, and it's just not enough. Our children are suffering, and somebody has to stand up and say no more. So I urge a no on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is the adoption of Amendment 558. All in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. The amendment is not adopted. With the consent of the House, the Human Service, Youth, and Early Learning Committee amendment is adopted. Hearing no objection, so ordered. With the consent of the House, the rules be suspended, and Senate Bill 5280, as amended by the House, will be advanced to third reading. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Senate Bill 5280, as amended by the House, on third reading and final passage. Remarks? The good member from the 48th, Representative Wallen.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And thank you for the good debate tonight. And I want to thank you personally for all of your advocacy for those that are the most vulnerable among us. I think that child abuse is very underreported, but numbers out there say that 1 in 7 of us have been abused as children, and most of those by members of our own family. What is mandatory reporting? It's a legal obligation to report where you observe or suspect that children have been abused, abandoned, or neglected. And who are mandatory reporters right now? May I read, Madam Speaker?
Please proceed.
Pharmacists, medical examiners, school personnel, child care providers and law enforcement officers, juvenile probation officers, corrections employees, placement and liaison specialists, and of course any adult residing with a child suspected who suspected to have been abused. My goal in bringing this bill forward when I did was to increase the number of trusted adults in children's lives that they could go to and know that they could tell their stories to, and that something would be done. Members, I was surprised and saddened to learn that Washington is a state that did not require clergy members to be mandatory reporters of child abuse, abandonment, and neglect. Our members of the faith community are trusted in our families, and sometimes our families make mistakes and invite strangers into homes that cannot be trusted with our children. I want an atmosphere where as many of us as possible are mandatory reporters of abuse, and that we protect our most vulnerable. That is the goal of the bill. There should be no exceptions. All child abuse should be reported, and as many mandatory reporters should be in our society. So I'm urging you to join me in voting yes tonight, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 39th, Representative Eslick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just heard the statistics, 1 in 7. I am sure it's much more than that. I was 5 and he was 16, and he was a trusted friend to the family. We heard many stories tonight. And this is a very sensitive subject, as it has been over the last 2 weeks, as I've not only spoken to my family, but to my friends, to our caucus. Yes, there is no excuse for child abuse, and yes, we need to have more mandatory reporters. Yes to all of those things. If the bill had stayed the same as it did when it came over, I would be a yes, a definite yes. But I can't be a yes when it destroys my family's religion and billions of others. I think that it's important that we keep this separate, because we do know what happens in the confessional, and they are encouraged to speak outside the confessional so that they can be mandated reporters at that point. My heart goes out to everyone on this floor for this very difficult subject. We have to do more for our families. We have to do more to keep our society together. I'm standing before you today, and I'm going to be voting no on this bill, but not because I don't love children, and not because I don't want the help we need. It's just a difficult subject. And I know there'll be more people speaking tonight, and I know that we've got mixed on my side. I'll bet there's mixed on the other side. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 35th, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Permission to read.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. New Hampshire, West Virginia, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Texas, and even Guam. These are all states or territories in which this bill, as we see it right now, this language exists, where not only are members of clergy mandatory reporters, but it also makes sure that they have to mandatory report during something like confession. In those states, various people of different religious views, their religions were not destroyed. But I assure you that there was probably kids' lives saved in those states as a result. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, we are only one of 2 states, one of 2, Alaska and us, that has nothing for clergy, including in confession. Now, I've done a lot, I've tried to do a lot in my first session here to try to protect kids. I had one bill that protects kids or seeks to do so. I agree that we need to do more to protect kids. And much like, we're not talking about ruining confession. You can still go to confession. The RCW still says you have clergy penitent privilege. This has not violated First Amendment rights in any court in any of those states I listed off. But I think, Madam Speaker, in our state, we stand up and we say, do not pass go, do not collect $200. If you abuse a child in this state and a child tells you about it, you report it. You report it so that we can get that child help immediately and stop the cycle of violence and sexual abuse that is running so prevalently throughout our society. I urge a yes vote, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 25th, Representative Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am urging a no on this today. We have a serious problem in our state, and it's one organization, and this bill is sweeping up many other institutions because of it. You would think this organization that's been around for 130 years, that has published, also has a publishing company, and would like to sell you a Bible, or not, sorry, they'd like to give you a Bible and perhaps take a donation if you're so inclined. They will tell you that if you ask them what they think about childhood sexual abuse, they will tell you, we abhor it. Jehovah abhors child abuse. But you know what they also will do? They require 2 witnesses to the sexual abuse to validate it. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure anybody in this room that has been victimized and been abused as a child, it wasn't done with somebody else watching. That's how they get around this. Do you think this organization that publishes all these magazines on a monthly basis and writes lovely little articles about technology, your master or slave, mental health, and how the Bible can help? I went to their website this week and I searched for childhood sexual abuse. What could I find? Did they write a book on it? I found an article from 1990. Would an organization that abhors child abuse, don't you think they would take a more proactive step to protect children? They don't, they won't, they never will. And referring back to the Australian Royal Commission and the findings that were there and recommendations that were made out of that, they doubled down. They said, we will not change our ways. We can look at other institutions. We've mentioned the Catholic Church a lot here tonight. It's been on many headlines. We know that there's been a problem there. I go to their website and look to search for childhood sexual abuse there. They have a 2023 guide, how to protect your children, how to report abuse. There's a stark difference here between 2 organizations, one that wants transparency and wants to protect children, and one that's going to double down and say, not here, not ever. This bill is not going to protect those children because you have an organization that doesn't want to.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 6th District, Representative Graham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sadly, I am rising in opposition of this bill tonight. Had at least one of the reasonable amendments been accepted, I would have been able to absolutely support this bill tonight. Madam Speaker, I'm here in this seat right now because I worked before I came here to change the child sexual statutes of limitations in Washington State, because I was a 5-year-old kid with a sister and brother dead. And I'm asking, why didn't somebody do something about this? What happened? I have spent the better part of my life trying to answer those questions, Madam Speaker. And I emphatically support legislation just like this. I am rising in opposition because I see the hypocrisy that is connected to this. Madam Speaker, as we pass this on the floor tonight, which I have no doubt will happen, the opposite is happening, in which the same people that we talk about, pedophiles, are getting off so easily in this state. I see steps being taken overwhelmingly, Madam Speaker, that allow these individuals to be let right back out into our communities, protected in ways that they shouldn't be, Madam Speaker. We're not having a conversation about that. I think that it's great. We should be going after people that are doing this. But what message is being sent when we say, yes, tell about it. Yes, go to an adult and say something. Go to a teacher. But then the kids, just like me and so many other ones that I saw, there was no justice. Because our justice system lets down the victims. It protects the pedophiles. It protects the people that hurt children. Madam Speaker, do I sound angry? Yes, I'm angry. Because as a victim, I feel let down. I feel let down for the children that are going to be re-victimized in our justice system when this does pass. Because it hasn't been treated seriously, not as it should be. Maybe this will be a turning point. I sure hope so. Vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 41st, Representative Sen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to first thank you for allowing this important debate and to really recognize the emotional connection that too many of us have to sexual abuse as kids, and certainly the passion we have around our religion. So just want to really remind us, or it reminds us of the humanity of all of us in this room. Over the past few days, we've also talked a lot about our bills and heard the phrases like, it's all about prevention and let's protect our kids. And with this bill, we get to take action on that. This bill before us is about preventing children from child abuse and neglect. By adding clergy, all clergy, to the mandatory reporters list, we're going to be helping expose abuse and neglect. As we have heard, this bill was initially brought to us or inspired by the Jehovah's Witness story that I mentioned and that my good colleague has been talking about on the floor, about a very sad situation with an elder and 11-year-old boy. However, sadly, this bill, once we started talking about it, receiving testimony in committee, hearing from colleagues and constituents, this happens across all religions, this happens across our communities, and this happens across our families. With this passage of this bill, clergy will be part of the solution in preventing child abuse and neglect. We're not breaking ground here in Washington State. In fact, we're making up ground. 43 other states require clergy to be mandatory reporters, but not Washington. And states like Texas and Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and many in between specifically call out that the confession is not protected and that they must report child abuse and neglect. And I want to be really clear. It talks about reporting the child abuse and neglect. They cannot be forced to testify in court, and law enforcement has to find other evidence if they want to bring a case. That is protected. Madam Speaker, at the core of our work here in the legislature, we're here to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. And I would posit that children who have been abused and neglected are just that. Adding clergy as mandatory reporters and treating all clergy similarly is an important and frankly a belated step to protect them. Madam Speaker, I ask you to join me today in helping prevent ongoing child abuse and neglect for the peace and safety of children and of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 4th District, Representative Christian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Most of the bills that we vote on here are fairly easy for me to put a yes or no on. But there are a few that become really challenging, and this one is for me. Madam Speaker, my mother was a devout Catholic, and she was receiving her communion right up to her very last days. And I saw on her face the relief she received from confessing to her priest. And then on the same side of that, Madam Speaker, serving in the military, it just was ingrained in us, freedom of religion. It's in our Constitution. Do not let the state mess with our Constitution and our religion. And I firmly believe that as a Christian myself. And so I'm torn amongst this bill because the children are so important to me. So, Madam Speaker, I took some time when we started caucusing on this bill to just spend a little time with God. And may I read?
Please proceed.
If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone was hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. That was what came to me, that we need to care more about the children than the pedophiles, that I need to step up and put some of my freedom-loving beliefs behind me and allow the pastors to be required to report abuse. This was tough for me, seeing my mom, loving my country, but God showed me to vote yes on this bill to protect the children. Jesus said, do not hinder. He scolded his own disciples when his disciples stopped the children from coming to Jesus. Said, children, stop. You cannot bother the master. He cannot be. And Jesus scolded them and said, do not hinder these children from coming to me. Jesus put children first, and I'm going to do that with my vote tonight. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 13th, Representative Ybarra.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this is a bad bill. I think what we're trying to do is, obviously, we do not want child abuse anywhere, anytime, from anyone. Our kids are too precious. We all know that. My understanding of this bill is that it is supposed to help with the Jehovah's Witness issue, not with the Catholic issue, not with the Mormon issue, not with any other issue, but the Jehovah's Witness issue. What this bill does is roll everybody into one category. I do not want to see child abuse. Kids are the most important thing we have. What we want to do with this bill, and I think at the beginning what the Senate, the other side of the rotunda wants to do, is to figure out the Jehovah's Witness issue, not the Catholic issue, not the Mormon issue, not the whatever other religion issue. This rolls everybody into one category, and it does too much for what the remedy is for the Jehovah's Witness issue. So vote no Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 16th, Representative Rude.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just wanted to add one more quick yes on the bill. This is a really easy vote for me tonight. I realize it's not for some others. But we've had a couple other bills that kind of tie into this session, and I was doing a little bit of research while we were debating. One was related to female genital mutilation, and in my digging it appears that some of those practices are religious in nature in the Middle East. That's not an excuse for us to allow it in Washington State. Underage marriage is also a religious practice in other parts of the world. Not a good enough reason for us to allow it in Washington State. I think there's a common thread here, and it's about consent. We don't support those because they take away something from someone else. They injure another person. And in this case, I think when an individual has a level of authority or power and they come across this information, it becomes part of their knowledge, it is their obligation to act on that knowledge. If they do not act on that knowledge, they become complicit in that activity, the sexual abuse, the other physical abuse. Frankly, we should probably all be mandatory reporters. At least that's how I see it in my conscience. If I was aware of a situation like this and I did not report it to law enforcement, I would be partially at fault. And this is identical to me. I see no reason. I'm struggling to comprehend some of the arguments against this bill. I see no reason why clergy should be exempt from that, especially on the sexual abuse. It's such a horrific thing to happen to a child. And we have an opportunity tonight to create a system that assuredly is going to result in at least some intervention in child abuse. And so, for that reason, happily voting yes tonight.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 8th District, Representative Bernard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate this debate we've had tonight as well. And I just wanted to put forward just a few more comments as to why we should support this bill. Number one, I just want to put out there that I do strongly support the First Amendment. It is the First Amendment. There's a reason why I think it's number one. And that's because it's so critically important that we be able to worship where, when, and how we may. That's critically important. I don't think that this piece of legislation is trying to impugn any religion. I don't think we should be naming names or using certain religions because it happens in a lot of different institutions. And a lot of those institutions in which it happens, they're already reporters. I mean, this is already in place for them. This is just an added piece to, and this does not take away any religion's ability to practice how, where, or what they may. This does not take away a certain religion's ability to repent. It just simply does not take away the freedom to practice religion in any way, specifically the ways that have been mentioned this evening in this debate. Abuse happens everywhere. And I don't want to impugn religion because I'm deeply religious. I think it's really important. And freedom lovers everywhere, those of us that love the Constitution and believe that it is divinely inspired. This in no way takes away someone's freedom of religion to protect children by having clergy not be exempt from reporting child abuse. It simply does not. This is the right thing to do, and I would urge the members of my caucus to vote yes. Thank you.
I want to remind members to speak to the policy and not to urge other members how they vote. The good member from the 25th, Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with the good gentleman from the 16th. Is that right? Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with the good gentleman from the 16th when he says that he thinks that everyone should be mandatory reporters. I agree with that thought. We have a moral duty if we find out about child abuse to report it. If the watchman doesn't cry out, then the blood is on his hands. And that's a very solemn and good moral duty. I do worry about this policy, and this has been a really difficult debate to listen to. I do worry about this policy because I think the pivotal point that we're talking about is the penitent clergy privilege in confession, in a confession booth type of a situation. And I worry that if we take that away, that it's going to have a deterrent effect on people confessing. And I worry that abusers will not seek the help that they need from the one place that they might seek it from their clergyman. And I worry that this will have the unintended effect of being a deterrent effect on confessions. And I worry about the First Amendment, and it's not a casual worry in comparison to the magnitude of the problem of child abuse. I worry about the government being involved in our religion, and it does concern me. You don't have to look back too far in history to find government abuses of this. So this has been a very difficult discussion to listen to, Madam Speaker. I'm going to be a no on this policy tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 9th District, Representative Dye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a tough one because for me as a conservative person, I value the institutions that have underpinned our culture for thousands of years and that have created, in fact, the republic that we are so privileged to be a part of. Those institutions include the church that framed the structures that hold our republic together, not the other way around. It was the values that coalesced, that recognized that it required a religious people, a moral people, to hold a republic that holds the freedoms that we appreciate, and that the country that we have is held together by covenants with each other that will honor each other's faith and the diversity thereof, that will not compel speech, but that will allow speech to be spoken freely, whether we agree or not, that we can have dialectical conversations to debate great ideas in peace and freedom. So this debate appears to me that while our desire to achieve an end may overcome the protections that have underpinned our great nation for 2.5 centuries, it frightens me in many ways because fundamentally it breaks promises. Washington State is one of the least churched in the nation. It's not the least church. And so it doesn't surprise me in many ways that there's not an understanding of our faith. And so I'm disappointed that we have to face this bill, and I, as a conservative, cannot support it at the way that it is, that we should have taken the amendments to protect the great religions. Thank you.
Additional remarks. The good member from the 16th, Representative Clicker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I had mentioned before, talked a little bit during the one amendment, this bill is going to be so counterproductive from what probably the intention could probably be. The idea of that clergy will report the abuse. If I can compare it to a bill that was passed a few years ago, which was police pursuit. Once that was passed, my own son, that's a police officer, said, he said, I want to stop 11 vehicles this week. 9 of them took off. I couldn't pursue them because they knew exactly that they could run away. They could get away from him. So here we are with a bill that's going to notify the different people that are child abusers, pedophiles, and when they know they aren't going to, if they have to confess, they're not going to do it. They're going to stay away. Why would they tell clergy when they know they're going to be reported? Or on the other hand, if they allowed the church, being separate from the state, to do their job, they would be able to help that person, that sinner, the pedophile, the child abuser, that they made that first step in confessing their sin. But this bill is going to be counterproductive. We will probably see quite a few less people going to confession, confessing what they've done, because they don't want anybody to know. I ask and urge a no vote on this bill that's going to be counterproductive to what the cause should be.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 49th, Representative Stonehill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This floor is where we debate a number of times what is good for the people of the state, whether or not we'll provide it, and if so, how. It's also a place where our personal, our values-based, our spiritual beliefs come to intersect and, like tonight, even collide. I've been raised Catholic all my life. I remember Wednesday nights of CCD before attending Catholic school. I don't feel my religion is under attack under this bill. This bill honors some truths that I hold solidly. Deacon, teacher, father, coach, troop leader, elder, clergy. These are all titles for people who carry trust, faith, provide us guidance, but also hold power. As a good gentleman mentioned before, that has an impact on whether or not consent can be provided. What a devastation to find that trust has been broken by somebody who holds that level of power or trust in your life, especially to not even know that they are committing a sin, because you don't know that trust has been broken because you are at the hands of their guidance, their support. Madam Speaker, abusers must not continue to be protected in Washington state under our laws. Not being able to speak out because of your community connection and faith, because of the power that holds over you, and having to live with the shame, the secrecy that comes with being a victim of childhood abuse has no place in Washington state. Coercion and abuse are rampant in places where there are shadows of secrecy and power, and that will continue unless we pass this bill. Because the more shadows of secrecy in Washington state, the more victims of childhood abuse will grow up here. Passing this bill provides reporters to end that. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe that members of the clergy in this state should be mandatory reporters. I'm also voting no on this bill. Madam Speaker, you can believe that clergy should be mandatory reporters and still vote no on this bill. Madam Speaker, if we had kept to the original form of this bill, I believe that we would have had a unanimous support for the bill. It's the modifications we've made to the bill since it was first presented to us that have caused some of the concern and will cause some of the no votes that you're likely to see when this bill comes to the big board. Madam Speaker, we are touching on sensitive subjects. We are speaking emotionally in this debate. But what I'd like to make clear is my objection to the current form of the bill has not to do with its requirement that clergy be mandatory reporters. That's a good thing. That's a fine thing in public policy. The problem with the bill in its current form is not that it hides in secrecy or creates shame. It's that it breaks the seal of confidentiality, of penitential confession. And that, as we discussed, that is identified primarily with one organized religion, but it is not unique to one organized religion. And the seal of true penitential confession is important not only to the essential elements of that religion, those religions as practiced, it's important to the spiritual and intellectual well-being of individuals. And Madam Speaker, these are the foundational things that have brought generations of immigrants to our shores. The fact that our country and our state protects foundational things like the right to privacy, the right to conscience, and the right to practice religion. These are important values, Madam Speaker. You can believe that clergy should be mandatory reporters and still want to protect First Amendment rights to practice religion. Please vote no.
Thank you. Additional remarks? The good member from the 13th, Representative Dent.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm a victim of child abuse. I have family members that are victims of child abuse. Some of my closest friends are victims of child abuse. I get it. I became a foster parent because of my passion for children, and after I became a parent, a foster parent, I realized why I was doing it. Because every foster kid that came into my home had been a victim of child abuse. Whether it was physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, they were a victim. And I didn't want that to happen to any kid again. And I still don't. There's nothing more painful. There's been nothing more painful in my life than to have a foster child on my lap that trusted me enough to spill out everything that had happened to them and crying their eyes out, sobbing and shaking. I get it. My biggest concern with what we did here tonight, we had a chance to really make a great piece of legislation, as the previous speaker said, that everybody would have voted for. My concern is we just can't give a little bit to protect a religious liberty, which puts many of us in a spot. Because I would like to vote for this bill, but I just can't do that. I just can't. Because I have to think about what the future means for all of us, including our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to which I have 5 great-grandchildren. They're important to me, and their future's important. I'm sorry we couldn't find some way to collaborate on this bill. I am asking for a no vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is final passage of Senate Bill 5280 as amended by the House. The Speaker's about to open the roll call machine. Speaker has opened the roll call machine. Has every member voted? Representative Corey, would any member like to change their vote? The Speaker's about to lock the roll call machine. Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Clerk will announce the record.
Madam Speaker, there are 75 yeas, 20 nays, 3 excused.
Having received a constitutional majority, Senate Bill 5280, as amended by the House, is declared passed.